Hey guys, so I'm here, as you know from the video I posted of the haul from the Czech Republic back at my parents' house, and I had a lot of books here at my parents' house, both many that I've read, but a lot of which that I haven't ever read, that I thought I would never read, but have now taken an interest in again. Um, so I thought I would share those with you. So the haul is going to be in two parts. The first part is going to be books I haven't read. Then the second part is going to be the books I um, have read. You know what? I'm going to reverse that. I'm going to do the books that I have read first, actually. I just changed my mind. I'm sorry. Um, but I'm going to start with a bunch of novels that I've read. The first is A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, which I really loved. I found it kind of depressing when I read it, but I still loved it. Surprisingly, I didn't think I would. Not usually a fan of war stories, but well, that's not really true. What am I saying? I'm not a fan of war stories. What am I talking about? Sorry, I like war stories, but I don't know why I didn't think of. It's a love story. That's probably why I thought I wouldn't be a fan of it when I was going into it. But I really loved it. So I'm keeping that. I may reread it at some point, but I don't know. I wanted it because I like it. The next is a bunch of D.H. Lawrence and Thomas Hardy. Although one D.H. Lawrence is on another pile. Okay, here we go. So here are I have three D.H. Lawrence novels, which I all read for the course I took on D.H. Lawrence and Thomas Hardy. And the first is Sons and Lovers, um, which I didn't really care for at the time. Not that I didn't necessarily like it as a book, just the themes didn't really resonate with me at all. Um, but I have been thinking about it lately and thinking maybe I should reread it at some point. Um, and yeah, so I figured it wouldn't hurt to have it. Next is Lady Chatterley's Lover, which I did enjoy when I read it. Uh, yeah, and but the last book is the one that I've been most inclined to reread, which is Women in Love, which I've talked about a little bit, and which I'm fascinated by. At the time, it was my least favorite that I'd read by D.H. Lawrence, but now I think it's probably my favorite by him, as it's kind of grown on me as I've thought about it. Um, Next is a bunch of Thomas Hardy, four Thomas Hardy novels. First is the Test of the D'Urbervilles, um, which which was my favorite Thomas Hardy at the time, but I've sort of grown to it hasn't stuck with me that much. Um, Not like, for example, Jude the Obscure, and also I don't really like the ending that much. Um, but yeah, there's that. The next is The Return of the Native, which I really liked when I read it. Sort of like Test of the D'Urbervilles, but again didn't stick with me as much as others. And then The Mayor of Casterbridge, um, which was really interesting. I loved the psychological study of the main character of that novel. And then Jude the Obscure. And the reason I've sort of been inspired to grab all these Thomas Hardy books was because Conrad at 7 Days at Sea did a video about Jude the Obscure. And this is the one out of all the Thomas Hardy novels, this is probably the one I want to reread the most. If I end up having to leave any of these behind because I don't have room in my bag, the one I will probably save is Jude the Obscure, and the one from D.H. Lawrence I'll probably save is Women in Love. So yeah, just a disclaimer, these may not all make it back to my apartment, but I do want them back at my apartment. So yeah. So next, some other books that I have read. Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. His memoir of being raised as in a desperately poor family in Limerick, Ireland, which I enjoyed, and I enjoyed the sequel almost as much, if not more. The next is three books I've talked about a fair amount. The Gilead trilogy. Yeah, these all these books really gave me new insights into theology, and that I never kind of opened my eyes to how it's applicable to life even when you're not religious, I guess. which was interesting. So yeah, Gilead, which I obviously loved, but Home is my favorite of them. Home was just, yeah, it was heartbreaking, but beautifully written. And then Lila, which I also loved. Um, and next is, I believe the rest of this is all nonfiction. So we have The Story of Buddhism by Donald Lopez. This recently came up on Steve Donahue's channel about Buddhism. He was talking about that book, Why Buddhism is True. And when he initially got the book in a haul, he kind of did this rant about the way that the West kind of essentializes Buddhism and thinks of it as like not a religion somehow, or that it's somehow more scientific than other religions, or makes more sense than other religions. And I think that if you are someone who believes in that sort of essentialized view of Buddhism, this will be a good antidote to that. Because I had to read this for a class I took about Buddhism, and this guy who wrote it, Donald Lopez, is one of the leading scholars in the United States on Buddhism, and the professor I took the class from was a former PhD student with Donald Lopez, so he was very big on this, like, dispelling this myth of Buddhism as there are all sorts of crazy things in Buddhism. I mean, there were Buddhist holy wars. There might still be. Buddhists believe in the Buddha being able to fly, or like bodhisattvas being able to fly. Buddhism is just as weird and supernatural and full of seemingly senseless rituals as any other religion. So, if it looks like a religion, if it talks like a religion, if it smells like a religion, it might as well be a religion. Yeah. So I think I want to reread that soon and do a video about it and do my own rant about Buddhism in a whole separate video. Next is a book that was mentioned at Madman Reads and Rocks, and it's Thomas More's Utopia, which was one of the books that initially got me into reading, actually. And it's interesting that the books that got me into reading initially were like these works of philosophical works of nonfiction, and that I've sort of fallen out of reading them on a regular basis. And I want to remedy that sometime soon. So there's that. Next is The Liars Club by Mary Karr. Actually, my favorite of Mary Karr's memoirs is Lit. I love the whole alcoholic recovery kind of narrative in it. But this is still a great book. I still loved this. It's weird to call it fun, but it is kind of fun, even though she had kind of a rotten childhood. But yep. And then next is Zealot: The Life and Times of Jesus of Nazareth by Reza Aslan. And this is a book I really want to reread, because when I read it, I don't know, I don't remember. I remember hardly anything from it. But it's kind of what it sounds like. It's sort of trying to parcel out who may have been the historical Jesus, or if there wasn't one, who may have been the inspiration for the figure of Jesus, if there was one. So there's that. Next is a big history book, A History of the Arab Peoples by Albert Hourani. And another book I think I might reread at some point, but the name is self-explanatory. It's a history of the Arab peoples, in the Middle East particularly. And I've always been interested in Islamic history, and so a lot of this is tied up with Islamic history, so there's that. Next is The 12 Caesars by Matthew Dennison, which he wrote. It was inspired for him by Suetonius's The 12 Caesars, and really made me want to read Suetonius. But I also, at some point, want to reread this because, again, I don't remember much from it, unfortunately. Aside from the fact that I didn't read that Caesars were incredibly incompetent, which is kind of the main theme of it. It felt like throughout. But yeah, it's 12 Caesars from Julius Caesar onward. Yeah, just an examination of the reigns of 12 different Caesars following Julius Caesar, and how they came to power and all that good stuff. And the last one is a weird one. It's a book by a person in my family, actually. It's Oscar, an informal biography by Francis Kenyon Carpenter, who is the Francis Kenyon Carpenter is the mother of my mom's dad, so my maternal grandfather's mother. Um, and this is a biography she wrote of her father, Oscar Kenyon. And so it wouldn't be that interesting to people outside my family, but I really loved it when I read it. It was cool to learn some of that family history that I don't hear about very often, unfortunately. But yeah, and I wanted to have that copy with me. So there's that. And now I get to move on to the books that I have not read. So the majority of this is actually nonfiction. But I am going to begin with what fiction I've grabbed. And the first I grabbed because it was recommended to me, highly recommended to me by Fariba at the Medieval Reader. She said that if I enjoyed Gilead, I would enjoy this book, and it's Death Comes for the Archbishop by Willa Cather. And I don't love this edition. It's kind of one of those really big paperbacks that's like giant, like there it is next to my head, and it's like huge with tiny font and. But anyway, it's an edition, so I can read that. I got that edition from my aunt once, as just kind of my aunt was getting rid of books, and she knew I liked reading, so she just kind of gave it to me. Gave it along with a bunch of others. Some of these others are also some of those books that my aunt gave me, but I can't remember all of them. There's that. The next book is Murphy by Samuel Beckett. Another one of his, modernist novels. Actually, I think Murphy is kind of his most accessible, least sort of stream of consciousness-y novel, possibly. So there's that. Next, another Samuel Beckett, What? And finally, How It Is, which I think might be even more weird and stream of consciousness-y than The Unnameable. There is sort of a sampling of the pages. They're like, I don't think the first letter of each of those, if you even call them paragraphs, the first letter of the sentence isn't even capitalized, and there's no punctuation at all. And this, I feel like I remember hearing that this is, to the extent that How It Is has a story, it's about like a man who's lying in the mud dying, basically. So I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I don't know really what to expect from any of these. I don't know much about any of them. But since I read the trilogy, I've been excited to read more Samuel Beckett. And continuing with the Samuel Beckett theme, I found this. It's the Grove companion to Samuel Beckett. So it's like the book I already have by Hugh Kenner, but it is much bigger and much more extensive. I think I will replace that book by Hugh Kenner with this one. So it's a reference book, and you can just open to you can go to the index and look for what you're looking for. It has all of his works. I read the sections about the trilogy and about Waiting for Godot. And it appears I am becoming a bit of a Beckhead. I kind of was thinking about it, and I was like, is that what a super fan... Maybe that's what a super fan of Beckett should be called, a Beckhead? But I don't know. If anyone else out there is a fan of Samuel Beckett, let me know if you like the term Beckhead, or if there's already a term that's been invented. The next is the last sort of fiction here, and it's a translation of the Canterbury Tales. This beautiful edition that my mom got me for Christmas. It's really nice. And yeah, I don't, So it's a translation, and I kind of want to try to read the Canterbury Tales in the original original English at some point, but I think what I'll do is I'll read this to give me a real kind of acquaintance with it and with the stories and everything. And then at some point I will try to get a hang on Middle English and maybe read through the original slowly or something. So, yeah. All the rest of these books are nonfiction. The first being a biography of Virginia Woolf by Hermione Lee, which is huge. It's 750 pages, and I'm gonna see that font. So it is a monster. I got about 500 pages into it at one point, but I apparently just gave up. It is super, super detailed. If you want a really detailed life of Virginia Woolf, then this is what you should go to. It like detailed down to talking about like the layout of her house. Yeah, but I never finished it, and I want to still. So I think I'm gonna start back from the beginning and finish it at some point. At some point. Don't hold your breath for any of these. I'm not sure when I'm gonna get to any of them, but definitely I'm gonna hopefully soon. Anyway, next is a book I've had for a while, but just haven't gotten around to reading, and it's Armenian Golgotha by Grigoris Balakian. And it's Grigoris Balakian was I believe a bishop, an Armenian Orthodox bishop who was in the Armenian genocide. Well, he was there for the Armenian genocide, and so this is his account of the genocide, both from his own experiences and from interviews with other people. So yeah, I think this is an important piece of history to learn about, and I want to read this. Next is another important piece of history, and it's another book that's been on my shelf forever and that I just haven't gotten to out of laziness, and it's the Nez Perce Indians and the Opening of the Northwest by Alvin M. Josephy Jr. And also huge. Not quite 700 pages, but still. I wrote a paper about the Nez Perce War in 11th grade, and so my mom had bought this for me as a source to help me, and I thought I would read it through and through at some point. At the time I was 16, so I wasn't reading huge things like this, but I think now I might be ready. So I'm going to read that at last. Next is another sort of interview or sort of memoir, but it's Disturbing the Peace by Václav Havel, which is an interview that a Czech journalist did with Václav Havel, just about his life in Prague and about the totalitarian communist regime and things like that. I think this will be really interesting, especially having visited Prague. Next is a book I mentioned the other day. It's A People's History of the United States in 2 volumes. I mentioned that I wanted to read this, and my parents had this copy here, in their own kind of personal library, so I stole it. Hopefully I will have gotten home before they realize it. Let's see, where is this going? And then lastly, we have The Silk Roads, A New History of the World by Peter Frankopin. I don't know how you say that name. But yeah, another book I got from my aunt, which sounds like kind of a sort of history of how the East and West have influenced each other throughout the ages. So talking about the Silk Road and how that played a role as well. But I think it uses that as sort of a jumping point to just do a kind of big history of Europe and Asia. So this will be really interesting. And lastly, we come to a special book in this book haul. And it's relevant to what's going on in my channel and a couple other channels now. and it is an edition of the complete works of Shakespeare. It's my parents' edition. It is very old. I don't know if I'll actually read out of it, but I have wanted and still want a nice big edition of all of Shakespeare's work, and my parents said they were fine with me taking this. So yeah, I'm gonna try to dress it up with tape a little bit because it you can see the cover moving there. Yeah, but was really nice. So I have that as well. I'm gonna have to be very gentle with it bringing it home, but there it is. So there you have it. Those are all the books that I'm taking from home. So thanks for watching, everyone. Goodbye.